Working. Detonation. Maybe it says that it's working. Oh yeah, it is working. We are live.
Sweet.
All right, cool. Well, that's a really. I'll edit that bit out. But all right, here we go. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Detonation, where we are transitioning slowly to the Archer Report, and Detonation will still exist. We're still going to be on Detonation, and we're still going to do Detonation shows, especially as they've papered over the debt bubble, as I said. They've just inflated the deficits and the debt, which means the debt bubbles are getting bigger, but you're seeing all the social crisis underneath starting to crack under that debt bubble. So it's been very interesting to watch that happen in real time. But in the meantime, Archer Report, we're going to be going over to that and doing more specific technology conversations on geopolitics, on technology, on all the other things that we usually talk about on Detonation, but more refined for that purpose, and to help us launch a show. Peter, you were, I think, number 4, 5, or 6, or 10. You were very early in on the Detonation show last time, and I'm very grateful that you're coming over here to help us launch into the Archer Report, because you're, as I said, you're one of everyone's favorite technology guy. You're well known in the technology space, hanging out there with Singularity University and a bunch of global conferences and conference people. Really do a really amazing work. Running a transhumanist page on Facebook, and your Twitter it's always up to date. It's always the latest news. It's always really engaging. You're always doing amazing work out there. So I really want to appreciate your work, and thank you for that. But the Archer Report, as I put in my little blurb here, markets, tech, crazy, because I thought about that word crazy, but it is, everything is kind of crazy. COVID's kind of crazy. The technology that we're entering into is kind of crazy, and I think that I think COVID could be now, this is a horrible way to put it, but I think COVID could be the accelerant for a massive technological revolution. It could be the catalyst of a new technological civilization that we've been looking at, because people have been just gravitating to technological solutions to get us out of this COVID crisis. We're abandoning the old industrial ways of thinking, which we've been talking about. We were building up. If you're watching Detonation, we're building up. We're going, there's industrial thinking here. It's not making sense. And then COVID-19 hit, and bam, everybody's starting to change the way they think, the way they approach technology, the way they approach a managed world system. This idea of limited resources is starting to fall out of their heads, and COVID really was the catalyst event. But it is going to be a crazy time, because we're dealing with huge population groups, and we're dealing with massive new integration of technological change into society, whether that be in civic, industrial, military, or other spaces. So I'm calling it markets, tech, crazy. So welcome to the Archer Report. This is Experience that presents hot topic discussions on politics, business, newsmakers, global trends, present day conflicts, and dangers facing our world. And I'm your host, Steel Archer, going to take you through, and we got Peter Xing here to help us. And Peter, firstly, how are you? Thank you so much for coming down to the Archer Report and Detonation. Detonation's still going to be here, so. But thank you for coming down on a Saturday and hanging out with me and walking the audience through this. How are you?
Pretty good, Steel. No, it's a pleasure to be back. And, it's been a while since we last chat, and this thing was pre-COVID. So, no, it's great to see you jumping onto this new show. And it's always a pleasure talking to you about the latest tech. You ask great questions. I've seen the journey you went on since the last time we had the Detonation Report. And your videos are just getting better and better. So, yeah, great to chat to you again.
Well, I lost my green screen, so now I just look like a guy in my bedroom, which it could be more closer to the truth closer to the truth than what I, well, and also we are getting new sponsors as well. I forgot that was supposed to be the first thing off the bat, but I'm really excited. So we're staying around with Thrivous. That's nootropics. Stimulate your brain. You can be faster, more competitive, healthier into the future with great nootropics from Thrivous. But we're also going with a VPN company that I will explain to you more about. We're going to have the CEO of that VPN company, Ambient. It's one of the best VPN companies out there, if not the best VPN company out there. And I really want people to join up to that. So we are going to have the CEO of that company on here. We're going to talk about the new sponsorship deals and stuff like that, and how to protect yourself and your security, in the cyber world. We've had in Australia, we've had a cyber attack by some foreign nation, who knows? But this is nothing new. This is completely, this is the new world we live in. It's cyber warfare. It's been going on since the invention of computers. So nothing new there. And you, as an individual, want to maximize your security and your identity in this new world. It's just part of a toolkit of sanity. And if you don't have it, you are going to be subject to distortions. So cool. Yeah. All right, Peter. So you're on the front line there of the technological revolution. You just talk, man. I want to hear what you've got to say about this COVID stuff, or technology advancing, because we've got so much to talk about. I mean, we've got Elon Musk over there, and he's just a huge character. We could spend the next 100 years talking about Elon Musk and all of his different enterprises, all of them, from the Boring Company to the SpaceX to Neuralink to Solar City to whatever. I mean, this is just a huge topic. But also, since COVID, a lot of pharmaceutical drug companies, vaccine technologies, there's a lot of innovation there. Testing kits, a lot of innovation in the 3D printing space. We were talking to some 3D printing guys. Big innovations there, because we're trying to bring manufacturing back in a more realistic way that deglobalizes the world in a way. It's not deglobalization in the actual sense, but it's kind of an economic liberalization, using advanced technologies, and making yourself, your country, your people, your personage, yourself, as an individual, sort of less reliant on a foreign actor. But that's just a technological solution. So we've got a lot going on. Where do you want to start? Where do you want to open up on? What have you been following in the technological space?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of all this stuff really hit home around March, around how, what the meanings of COVID-19 would have on the impact on the economy. Like we heard towards the end of 2019, how this strange new flu-like disease was actually starting to hit in China. And then we didn't realize that the same was going to happen all around the world, the sort of magnitude of that impact would have. So by March, we knew that we were in lockdown, and we started looking at scenario planning. We were like, what are the sort of next steps, and what are the implications of everyone being in lockdown for at least 3 to 6 months, or maybe even longer? So Singularity University organized a virtual summit in March, and they called it the Virtual COVID-19 Summit. So I was one of the speakers there to talk about what the coronavirus may actually mean, that automation is coming sooner than we thought. I talked about how currently at the time we had a scarcity mindset when there was a rush to the shops of all the toilet paper panic, which is not even talked about anymore, which is so strange. Over the last 3 months, it's just gone through peak hype, and then everyone had their rolls ready to go. So everyone's got some excess supply now, probably lasts them for a good couple of years. And what that really meant was that scarcity mindset was still embedded in our sort of evolution in humans, thinking that these large rolls of toilet paper in the shopping malls and the shopping centers were essentially disappearing in front of our eyes. So we saw lots of empty aisles, and our perception of these 3D spaces essentially gives us that false illusion that there was that scarcity, but we didn't actually understand the manufacturing process of how, say, for example, toilet paper is made. And you go to a factory that makes toilet paper and you realize that it's all inputs of paper and energy. So it cuts down lots of trees. So it's really bad for the environment to have to produce all this excess supply. And then at the same time, it's actually a very automated process in producing the toilet paper itself. You know, there's very, very few humans involved in the advanced manufacturing side of things. And we realized that all we really needed to do is ramp up the production and increase the inputs for those factories. And that's actually producing that abundance of toilet paper that we see today. So yeah, that was the sort of the initial talk. And then we talked about, you know, what that might mean for automation across the entire industries and the economy. And there was a report from ARK Invest. It's part of their big ideas. So ARK Invest is a VC that invests in innovation and disruptive companies. And they basically put a number on the impact of automation over the next, say, 4 years. And they realized that automation will actually add $800 billion to the US GDP by 2024 and potentially $12 trillion by 2035. So that's across, you know, industrial robotics and manufacturing. It's across service robots, say logistics and, you know, delivery robots and assistants. And then there's automated systems, automation systems like in restaurants and production lines. So they essentially did a lot of number crunching and saw how industrial robots have seen this decline in price over time. It's following this thing that they call Wright's law. So it's similar to Moore's law, but essentially it's like the learning curve of, say, someone that produces things. And with each new unit that they produce, that actually reduces the cost of production because they learn from their mistakes and they embed those improved processes in the production line. So that's Wright's law. And what Wright's law means that is that similar to that exponential curve that Moore's law goes along, the price elasticity of demand can actually increase quite a lot. So you see this exponential growth in the unit of sales of industrial robots over time. And then actually the price of it is falling at an exponential rate as well. So what we're going to see essentially is an abundance of these robots. And that's been accelerated by COVID because there is this burning platform out there in the economy where people have no longer any choice but to employ these robots to actually go out into the physical world. Before, it was really, the technology was there, but the human user adoption was not. It's you know, literally a switch of a button, and over the last 3 to 6 months, we've seen almost 10 years of, you know, it's a human adoption acceleration in innovation in a matter of just weeks, right? One of the examples they thought in the industries that will impact is, say, autonomous delivery. You know, everyone's using Uber Eats and all those, you know, Deliveroo type services, and the main cost of that delivery is the humans involved, you know, riding the bicycles, driving the cars to deliver these meals on wheels. And so, you know, when we look at, say, human delivery costs, at the moment, it's about $1.60 US per mile. What ARK Invest thinks is that with the onset of autonomous delivery bots, whether it's ground-based or via drones, so you can see, for example, you've seen videos of the Amazon delivery drones and also some of the UPS ones from the US, ground-based ones. We've seen ones come out from Domino's as well, these ground-based robotic drones. These essentially can drive the costs down of autonomous delivery robots from $1.60 from a human per mile to 6 cents per mile. So it's essentially negligible. And that would mean, what the implication of that is, you know, when you look at how much it costs to make a home cooked meal, there's a lot of cost that's not been accounted for in that price, in the things that you put into it. Say the time cost, right? You know, the food preparation and the cleanup time, that's money. Time is money. And then there's the food costs, like all your groceries and things like that. And then you have to go out and shop for your groceries. So that also can be delivered to you at your home. So when you add all that up, you know, if you really put a present value to that, and also, you know, use an average measure of time cost per person in the US, it's about $12 per meal per person. And $12, you know, you don't feel like you're spending $12, but when you count it all up, that's actually the net cost of home cooked meals. And you compare that to what a fast casual meal might mean, right?
Mm.
You can also be $12 and with the same sort of ingredients, the same sort of the healthy choices that you put into your own food, because you can select the ones that are healthy and then actually produced in an efficient way. So, and then the delivery of that is negligible. So $12, you're actually reaching price parity. And we talk about price parity, say in the cost of US dollar to the Aussie dollar. We talk about price parity in the cost of energy, say coal and versus renewable energies like solar. This price parity is actually happening to the same with home cooked meals and automated fast casual meals. So that might mean that sort of choice, the consumer choice, the value for the consumer of choosing home cooked or fast casual is essentially going to make it a no-brainer for everyone to order online and get that delivered in a healthy way. So that's still personal choice, but I think we're going to see a no-brainer choice coming along in the next 5 years. And if you think about also the unaccounted for cost of food inside the home, right? So all that food prep and cleanup, all that food at home, all the preparation and food cost, it's about $2.4 trillion of food inside the home. But most of that, the time cost, is not measured in GDP, right? It's non-market activity, labor-based cost. So it's about 2/3 of the total addressable market when you compare it to, say, a fast casual. That essentially means that we're going to get this excess of value, essentially 2/3 of that total value that's been wasted in the economy and been making that productive. So just similar to how, when we look at what SpaceX and Starlink will be able to do to create connectivity to the next 4 billion people, right? This is probably, more for the developed nations. But because we're going to have, let's say, with Starlink, an additional 4 billion minds connected to the internet, adding that human capacity, doubling the human capacity of the world, right? So the intellectual capacity we'll have for the world. And having 2/3 of also the food time prep cost for the developed nations, that also means that you'll have 2/3 of that sort of excess capacity to put our minds to things that might add to advancing humanity as well. And when we can take those learnings in the developed nations of automating food and delivering those to the developing nations and to the third world countries. So you can see how that sort of abundance mindset and this sort of methodology through rights law can essentially mean that the technology is democratized and lift people out of hunger and poverty all around the world.
All right, so that's a lot of information there. And on the food thing, because of COVID, I independently went out and did my own research on the cost, that $12 cost. I actually worked that out because I was trying to limit my exposure to other people by contemplating takeaway and all that other stuff as well. And yeah, that's about the same number that popped out in my research as well. And it's not there's because on the time value, if you get takeaway and you have cost parity there, actually you end up saving time and productive time because you don't have all the dishes and you don't have all the maybe you use maybe you only have a knife and fork to wash up at the end, right? So you don't have to use the dishwasher, which cuts down your waste anyway and reduces your carbon footprint. If people are using those push bikes, if you get it locally, because they're using a big kitchen that's on anyway. I don't know, industrial farming, but then it comes up with the idea that we do need city farms, so that because it's that transport. But if you're cooking at home anyway, you've got that transport anyway. It's just transport to the home. The amount of household waste, when you're talking about household waste, a lot of households will not admit how much they don't use. I mean, I drink a lot of milk. I didn't realize I had a thing about this much milk in one of my cartons, and it went off. And I found it, and I was like, "Oh no!" And I wanted to use it because I don't want to waste this much milk in my carton. No way. But I did waste that much milk, and that's household waste, and that happens a lot. And companies are trying to reduce the amount of waste that they have, whereas households I don't necessarily try and reduce. Some do, some don't, but that's more variable than companies that usually don't try and waste that much. In hospitality, when you talk about hospitality, they try and maximize the sanitariness of the, because if the health inspector comes in there, they're probably going to go out of business concerning the fines, especially in these sorts of countries. I can't speak about other countries, but yes, it's not as bad an option as takeaway is not as bad an option as people think. But again, you got a lot of the health problems, MSG, and you can't in terms of your own health, you can't read the packaging on every individual product that they get, and if you can't determine where that company gets their garlic from, if they want to import their garlic from Vietnam and you like Thai garlic, well, you're not going to have a say, are you? So
that's where a lot of this sort of convergence now happening. Definitely lots of pros and cons, and that's where I think where that convergence of technology will also start to meet some of those challenges around, say, food provenance. Say everything that you get in your current meal that's been delivered, let's just say it's being currently cooked in those big kitchens, like you say, right? It's being there's actually a new concept called ghost kitchens. So it's not really new, but essentially being more and more popular. And one of Uber's former founders, Travis Kalanick, has actually founded ghost kitchens. But basically, it's like renting out these large kitchen industrial complexes for people to make meals in, and then that way they streamline a lot of the costs to create those meals. And what it probably do is similar to how sort of the other sort of Uber business model, essentially monitor how people are cooking the dishes. So eventually the machines will be able to replicate some of those processes as well for autonomous cooking. And if you add that to autonomous delivery, that'll drive the cost down even more. And with 3D printing, advanced manufacturing, essentially that's sort of, that you can see where that trend is going in terms of the production side of things. But onto the food provenance. Yeah, sorry, you were saying?
You wanted to say something? You continue.
Yeah. So on the food provenance side, well, all those ingredients that go in, right? So how do we currently track that? Right now, it's just in a little table of the ingredients. You don't know where they're from, like you say, for example, the garlic. That's where the blockchain and IoT is essentially trying to address. So sensors from the point of production, say if it's a vertical farm that's been locally grown, or in a larger farm that's in the rural areas. Essentially the growth, the growing of, say, the essentials. So if it's rice, we currently at my work, we've developed a KPMG Origins, this food provenance for rice, where you can track and trace the entire supply chain of that rice from the journey it's come from the rice fields to the end supermarkets. And you can do the same from the supermarkets or the previous supply chain being the warehouses and distributions and to the farm. You can even trace that back to the restaurants using that particular rice. So for each sort of product, you can trace that back to its origins. And then when you're making advanced versions of that product, say if it's steamed rice with your, say, chicken curries, the curry can be traced to its origins. The chicken will be able to trace to its origins. Any additional ingredients can be traced to its origins, say, added sugars and salts and things like that. So each one of those ingredients, you should be able to, as a user, scan each of your meals. This is like in the very near future. Scan each of those meals, identify every single ingredient that's gone into that meal, and track and trace all the way back to its origins. And so this is where that sort of understanding the health issues of, all your health concerns will become transparent. And through that process, it'll actually incentivize companies to use healthier choices, because consumers will be better educated, and compare that to the health if they actually bought groceries at the supermarket, because they can essentially compare all the origins of those ingredients to the meals that are cooked by the restaurants and say, well, if it's all the same, why am I paying more for this particular thing? And it costs me time and money to make it myself. So the I guess it's economies of scale obviously makes the case that it's better for the restaurant to make it, if everything else being equal. So that's sort of where we're heading.
That's incredible. And I like this idea of scanning your food and having all this information, and it reminds me of this company. I can't verify this. I've seen this in ads. I've seen this floating around. People reviewing it. It's called Lumen. It's the first device to hack your metabolism. Lumen knows if your body using fats, carbs, or fuel. It says here on their website, it starts with a breath. Lumen is the world's first handheld portable device to accurately measure metabolism. Once available only to top athletes in hospitals and clinics, metabolic testing is now available to everyone. So this is a really interesting device. So you can, it basically will tell you what you need to eat, essentially, to help you maximize your sleep, your physical activity, and your nutrition. And if you coupled what you're talking about with something like Lumen, once you get that data, you can forecast the needs and requirements of localized communities' food distribution for I don't know, maybe a year, maybe decades, depending on the population and the activity. In a big city, I'm guessing it could arguably be more stable, because you would just have a larger data set of all the individual actors, and as long as you didn't have any massive population changes, that had a different taste. One day the city was full of European people, and the next day it was full of Chinese people, and the next day it was full of Indian people. As long as that didn't happen constantly, you would have a more stable set over the years. So you would have coupled with something like this, you could know the food needs of a city years and years and years and years and years into the future.
Well, I think you'd be able to, with the technologies we have today with the sensors, you'd be able to update that in real time. So you don't need to forecast it out to be able to do these just-in-time changes to your supply chain or your supply planning.
Because that's done currently through the pricing mechanism. That's how that's done. That's how it's achieved, and that's very old school. When you couple it with advanced technology and our knowledge of the body and people's tastes and preferences on how the body works, right?
Yeah, it's all that convergence again. So, with IoT, you can create these digital twins of physical assets, but then with these additional sensors inside the body, and what Lumen is doing, you can actually have that quantified self, so inside the body, to have that digital twin. And that way you can actually create a personalized version of how you can make specific people's choices or tastes that you can make preference for. So you can know exactly what might be healthier for one individual compared to something that might be, say, they're allergic to another product, whether it's gluten or if it's, and for me, it's actually milk itself, right? Yep. I'm lactose intolerant. So yeah, that sort of, we'll be able to personalize that at that molecular level.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And hopefully, we'll be able to one day reduce the effects of something like lactose intolerance at the biological level as well. If not eliminate it, that would be great. But reducing the impacts of those sorts of intolerances is always good. For people. Well, the other thing you mentioned is Wright's law. Is it Wright's law?
Yeah, with a W. Yeah.
Wright's law. Okay. Can you just quickly expand on Wright's law, because that sounds really interesting. I just really want to understand that properly.
Yeah, similar to Moore's law, Wright's law is about sort of cumulative doublings, right? So if you think about a doubling in units instead of, say, the computational power, so the more you produce, so every time you double the number of units you produce, Wright's law estimates that the costs will decline by 40% with every doubling.
Yeah.
So that's actually a historical trend that they've seen since the Industrial Revolution. So when, say, Henry Ford was creating cars, they've noticed that the more cars he produced on a massive scale, and with every cumulative doubling, the costs of production of those cars, do you remember the Ford T1? So that's essentially declined by 40% every time that unit of production is doubled. And so, for example, you can look at whole genome sequencing. So it used to cost hundreds of millions of dollars when it was first fully sequenced. The first whole genome sequencing happened, in the early 2000s. And essentially, since that's happened, Moore's law has been followed and Wright's law has been followed. To now, in the early 2020s, we're seeing the costs of whole genome sequences to be around, between $100 to $1,000. And so, eventually that's going to go towards zero, become negligible. And that will mean that we can embed whole genome sequencing in just about every test that we do, whether it's a blood test that we have on a regular basis, whether it's a flu shot that we can have, that we also run a whole genome sequence test along with it, or even embed it in our bathroom activities, right? You can flush the toilet and get a whole genome done potentially in the future, and that'll tell you any changes to your genetics since the last time you've taken a piss, right? So that's a sort of where a world of perfect information and sort of trying to do that quantified self for you. And what that means is that you'll be able to pick up these, things like cancer that's actually at a genetic level, things like presupposed genetic diseases and disorders as well.
Yeah. So tell me what you think. Let's talk about COVID for a second, and tell me what you think about. You were talking about some pretty amazing technologies just around the corner with the genome editing, and the the technological curve is accelerating, Wright's law, Moore's law, all interacting with each other. Why is the COVID vaccine? Why is flu? Why is this something hard and we can't get our heads around? Why is the whole world economy tilting on whether we get a vaccine for COVID or not? When we have all this other amazing stuff either here or potentially around the corner, why is there this discrepancy where we can almost cure cancer, or we're getting close to curing cancer, but we can't cure the flu? And what does technology say about that?
Yeah, I mean, the core tenet of medicine is safety first, and that's why you see there is in science, in the practice of science, there's actually a very rigorous methodology, the scientific method, and that needs to be followed. Otherwise, your fellow scientists will find a way to disprove that, which is the very essence of the scientific method. Your hypotheses need to be falsifiable and reproducible. And so those that method means that you have to go through animal trials and then essentially safety trials for humans, and then human clinical trials to actually show the efficacy of those drugs and vaccines. So essentially what you need to demonstrate in evidence on a sample size, initially small sample size, and then a larger sample size, that it is, number one, safe to use, and then number two, able to be reproduced and to indicate that it actually works, so it's efficacy. And that's why the FDA exists. That's why in Australia there's the TGA and all those sort of regulatory bodies to ensure that the scientific method is being followed. At the same time, there is a movement called the Biohacking Movement that you'd be across, very popular along the transhumanist community, that's trying to democratize that approach. So these are the people that are saying we will opt out of that tenet of safety first. We are happy to put our bodies on the line to, in the name of science, be one of the early adopters of the sample size. So, skipping past the safety element, skipping past the animal testing, and going straight to the human trial on themselves to determine efficacy. The challenge with that movement is that we can't consistently facilitate the same experiment of all the conditions, because everyone is essentially acting at a decentralized way. They're not, it's hard to demonstrate there is a control in your environment for all the people that are part of that movement, the biohacking movement. But the more citizen scientists, the more educated that those biohackers become, the more that they're able to keep those controls in place in a scientific way. So they just need to demonstrate that, evidence that, record themselves, find other ways to, with the internet, be able to document that themselves. And with all the tests that they can run on themselves as well, as long as that's applied consistently, we will see that sort of movement go democratizing and accelerating the current methods, the scientific methods for human trials.
Wow, yeah, and we've had plenty of discussions on this program on Detonation actually, and we will continue to have on Archer Report and Detonation about the FDA and these other regulatory authorities that on one hand are set up and designed to ensure safety and stability and some sort of regulated progress, and on the other hand can seem to be arguably standing in the way of some sorts of progress and some sorts of individual rights and liberties. For example, in the biohacking movement, which you referenced, where these people are more than happy as individual sovereign actors to take those steps and sometimes to the point where it's unsafe by legislating against them because they find ways around it, legal loopholes, whether that be actual biohacking. I've had Tim Cannon on here. He's an interesting character. We lost the audio with him. I couldn't get a second interview with him, but I had a chat to him for about an hour and a half of that interview. And yes, very, very interesting stuff, and lots of legal loopholes they had to jump through, going to Germany, etc., to do this. I've also talked to Liz Parrish on this sorts of stuff. Had to go to a different country again, but sometimes that makes it dangerous, and also then therefore you're importing something that's kind of not verified and not you're importing it. I mean, you've gone out, you've done it legally, but then you're importing it back. There's a gray zone there. So, I think governments will have to adapt to this movement, because this movement is growing. It's growing quite vigorously, and it's becoming more of a gray zone, especially when we're talking about why can Elon Musk engage in something like Neuralink, where you're fundamentally messing around with engage with something like Neuralink, where you're fundamentally messing around with people's brains, and Liz Parrish has to go to a different country for what she did. So there's talking points there, arguments there, and it's something that COVID is actually exposing in a big way.
And on the flip side as well,
because with COVID, there is a mass of people who are putting their hands up saying, volunteer me, I will try these vaccines, for any reasons, whatever reasons they have, and we can go through all the reasons, but that would take too long. There are a lot of different reasons that people would volunteer themselves to protect loved ones and to get fame and glory or money or whatever. There's plenty of clinical trials here in Melbourne, clinical trial places where people do it for extra cash if they're short on cash. So there's plenty of different reasons people want to do it, but people would like to do that. And this is the same in the biohacking arena. There's a big legislative hole, and it needs to be talked about. And Chairman Gennady of the US Transhumanist Party stood up to these guys and did a protest, which went pretty viral around the world in terms of the sovereign rights of biohackers and stuff. It's a very, very interesting topic, interesting discussion. And the more that they clamp down, the more unsafe it becomes. So they have to find a happy medium where the rights of individual actors are, this is my personal opinion, I don't know, but the rights of individual actors are respected, but at the same time, safeguards are absolutely necessary in order to verify and control the progress that's being made. I'd love to get Meow Meow, who's over there in Sydney, in your direction, who biohacked himself famously with a transport card. Had him on the show. Super interesting guy. He won the court case. In that respect, he won the court case. But yeah, that's one form of biohacking. That's a form of biohacking.
Exactly.
In Sweden, for example, is racing ahead with chip implants, while other countries aren't. So this is a huge debate, and it's the divergence of humanity that we've been talking about here all along. And what side of the coin do you want to be on? Because if humanity is going to diverge, we have to manage that divergence, because it's no longer a hypothetical. It's no longer a Star Trek. It's here. It's happening. People are diverging, and we have to talk about it in a honest and sincere way. We can't hold our heads under the covers anymore on these issues.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm all on, your court and Meow's court, obviously, being transhumanists. We're all trying to push the dial here. But you can see the flip side of that, how, some might even label Donald Trump as a biohacker with the hydroxychloroquine, taking that himself. It has been approved for a malaria use, but it's actually had a negative impact in terms of the US population essentially taking it. So you just, like, as an influential person, you also have to be mindful that some things that you do, maybe from a personal view, you do it. At the same time, you don't want to convince other people that it's also safe, even though the scientific sort of consensus isn't quite there yet. And same with his comments around, using UV light, inside the body, right? And leading to people drinking bleach and things. You can see that sort of where that slippery slope might also be. So I understand from the other side of the line where they're coming from, where the FDA and all the other sort of safety measures come from. At the same time, we really need to push how we can democratize the safe testing of this for people, biohackers in general, to be able to participate in science, because scientists have got to get off their ivory towers. It's just been too long. And, you've got people like David Sinclair, from UNSW and also Harvard Medical School, pushing the whole, treating the aging process as a disease, looking at drugs like NMN being a precursor to NAD+, which essentially demonstrated extending the healthy lifespan of mice by 30%, which are undergoing human trials now. So his view is that scientists, there's a reason why there's a distrust of science in the community, because when scientists talk, they talk in very technical terms, very hard to understand. They're trying to be very, politically correct and factually correct, to the point where their messaging gets lost, right? You hear some of the scientists talk and people just like, what are you trying to say? You're saying you're not certain about how the universe came to be, so God must have invented it. So it gets to the point where the logic of what they're saying makes sense from a technical perspective, but from a narrative storytelling, people are story-driven creatures, so you got to actually explain it to them in a way that will actually resonate with humans.
All scientists on the question of God should technically be agnostic. You should be agnostic. You should say, we do have evidence for God, and he's in the texts, and this is the evidence for God. Whether that holds up or not is not up to me. It's up to a mass of theologians and scientists and historians and whatever. And the other thing is, here's the Higgs boson, and here's the evidence we have for the initial beginnings of the universe, and we don't know. That should be the answer. Any scientist who says, "Oh, there definitely is no God because we don't have evidence," is an idiot.
That's right.
And anyone that says, "Well, definitely is because we can't find any other solution," is also an idiot. So you have those two idiots, and then you're supposed to be here in the middle, saying evidence-based reasoning, right?
Testable, falsifiable, and reproducible. So those three tenets of science, that's just really needs to be followed. You can't falsify the fact that God doesn't exist. So it's not scientific. It's not a scientific question, right? So there's no point going out there from a scientific perspective saying God doesn't exist. It's just not within the realm of the scientific method. So that's
Exactly. And we've got Mike DeVerde in the comments saying David Sinclair is a wizard. And actually, I did have, pre-COVID, I actually had an interview set up with him, but he got really busy.
His lab just got running again in Harvard.
Yeah, so. Which is really exciting, actually. I'm really happy about that because he's doing great work. So it's better.
I hope they fed the mice in the process. I hope they fed the mice during the lockdown periods and they're not all dead.
Oh, no.
Jeez.
I would like to get David Sinclair on here if we can at some point.
That'd be awesome.
I was in communication with him for a while there. So Mike DeVerde, David Sinclair is a wizard, and also he says here, Yu Cheng, Ryan, Lu's age reversal experiment with Yakayama factors is the key to super longevity. Do you know
Yeah.
what he's talking about, Peter?
No, it's essentially they found the way to measure the biological clock. So once you're able to measure the biological processes, the biological clock in the human body, then you can have a testable way to see if your drug is, slowing down that clock or making it faster.
Okay.
And what he's able to demonstrate in mice is that by doing a certain experiment, he's able to accelerate the biological clock. So they're making the mice age faster. And if you can go one way, then you can actually go the other way by not doing that particular method or increasing the mechanisms to prevent that particular technique from happening. And usually that is either senescence, telomeres reduction, or, in the case of NAD+, the lack thereof of NAD+ in the system. So yeah, so that's pretty exciting times, and essentially it's a testable, falsifiable, and reproducible method of extending the biological clock. So that means that he can then demonstrate with more experiments in his clinical trials that his processes are working, and for the general community as well.
He said they reversed the age of mice with 3 Yakimama factors.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, cool. Yeah. Well, I haven't done this in a while. I need to look over here. I should put a sign up, look here or something, because I'm always looking over on this screen and I only see the side of my face. I've got to learn to look over here. I am rusty. And also, I didn't even introduce you about Peter. So quickly about Peter. Peter is a keynote speaker and writer on transhumanism and emerging technologies. He's a co-founder of Transhumanism Australia, a community of technologists dedicated to helping society transcend the limitations of our human biology using science and technology. He also works on technology and growth initiatives at KPMG, helping organizations navigate and flourish in these unprecedented times of accelerating change and disruption. Peter is part of the Singularity University Australia team. As an advisory board member, he is also an executive member of the Science Party of Australia, a political party committed to upholding the scientific method in policy making. And it's very, very good stuff. And I really appreciate you coming on here, Peter. Peter Xing.
It's always a pleasure, Archer. Yeah, I wrote that blurb about a year ago, and I realized that the unprecedented times was even more unprecedented than it is at the time.
Well, all of the data, points to, emerging out of the information age and into something new, the emergent age, the information age, whatever you want to class it as. And this, I think this is happening, and I think we're looking geopolitically, looking technologically, looking financially, looking socially, in terms of societal constructs, looking politically. We could be on the edge of either the neo-feudalism that I worry about and I warn about and that I don't want to happen, the neo-feudal societies, or on the edge of the big technological society. And I feel like we're heading for a mix of that, because a lot of the core issues and structural problems with the world, including things like poverty, disease eradication, all of that, have not been sorted out, but these can be accelerated in a technological society. So I think we might be able to. There might be a huge influx of technology to try and quickly eradicate these problems before the clock. So I think we're heading to a super technology society in the next few years. Which is going to look quite different from the world that we were just in, and it's gonna be very interesting. Unprecedented times, absolutely. But we do now have the fiscal, because with detonation, we were complaining a lot about the monetary policy not matching up with the fiscal policy, but now you're seeing governments borrowing at these super low rates and actually injecting fiscal spending into the economy on a fiscal level, which is in line with the their own Keynesian theories. And where are they pumping a lot of that money into? Well, a lot of technology, a lot of technological investment, a lot of cyber infrastructure, so, technological infrastructure, laboratories, and transport infrastructure, and just look at the list. It's all technology based. It's huge, and anybody who had a job set, it's a skill set that's replaceable by robots already lost their jobs, and that's why we're talking about robot chefs. I mean, robot chefs make sense because it's a skill. It's an interesting skill, but it is a super repetitive physical contact skill that, if you can make a robot that can do surgery, why can't you make a robot that flips hamburgers? And one of the big reasons that they haven't pushed ahead on the hamburger flipping robots is because of that societal stability. Because essentially a McDonald's implies a employment for 15, 30 people, which spreads out amongst the community and can help 150 people in a community, right? So
have you read the short story?
Is huge, right? It's a huge loss.
Yeah. Have you read the short story called Manna by Marshall Brain?
No.
It's written like in the 90s. It's like Marshall Brain's the creator of HowStuffWorks.com. You remember that? How Stuff Works?
Yes.
Yeah. So he was a science fiction writer as well. So he wrote this piece called Manna, and he painted a futuristic view of when AI starts to take over, say, something like middle management at a McDonald's. It was a burger joint, and what the AI did was it told the lower employees, the people on the ground, through an earpiece, exactly what to do. So clean the floors, clean the bathrooms, staff the counter, for the next order, and things like that. And eventually, it got so good because it learned from human interactions that it replaced all the middle management and that was essentially all the profits that went to that company that created the AI. And the AI was called Manna. But at the same time, it actually means that software became not just limited to McDonald's or the burger stores. It got expanded out to every single middle management activity throughout the entire economy, which means that the single system was able to determine whether an individual minimum wage worker was worth hiring or not. So if you made a mistake as a minimum wage worker, not showing up to work, or you were late, you'd get deductions on your score, and eventually you'd be unemployable when you hit a certain score, that because that same system is embedded throughout the entire economy. You became unemployable in that economy. And so there was this sort of became the creation of a useless class as a result. This entire class of people that became unemployable, they went on government benefits. So the very basic, they had public housing, and they put all these people into these ghettos style, massive, low cost, fabricated 3D, 3D printed sort of high story ghettos. And, you weren't allowed to leave the premises because you would make disruptions to the other class that owned the means of production. So there was a segregation of class, and the AI essentially controlled those control limits. They enforced that those minimum wage, the useless class couldn't interact with the other class members outside the jurisdiction. And so it became very dystopian. And at the same time, the challenge to this Manna super intelligent AI was the creation of an open source version of Manna. So this is not owned by anyone because it's open source, and they decided to test it, funny enough, on Australia. So Australia as a country opted into this project. They called it the Australia Project. And in the Australia Project, every citizen was able to contribute a certain amount of money to get one share in the Australia Project. So let's say, I think it was a nominal amount, but basically they used that money to accelerate the development of the open source AI, which became better and better. So almost pretty much better than the Manna software as well. And that means that as a citizen of the Australia Project, you get one share, so one vote. and you also get 1,000 resource credits. So there's resource credits you can put towards anything, and it easily satisfies the basic needs and wants of what you need and want in the economy, because the production is all automated, like 3D printing. It's really gathering resources, fabricating things, essentially 3D printing things into abundance. And that's the sort of the abundance economy that Marshall Brain paints in the short story. At the same time, there's dystopian elements to it, because nothing is hidden. No one owns anything. Everyone is equal, which is utopic, but also, essentially it would control you so that you wouldn't be able to harm another person. So the malicious intent could not be actioned by an individual. So you lose that sort of individual control. So yeah, it's definitely worth a read. But essentially, I think at this rate, we are heading into that sort of Australia project scenario, but probably more leaning towards the manna scenario, where the AIs and automation, things like Travis Kalanick's Cloud Kitchen, will potentially just continue to monitor and become that middle management for all those, ghost kitchens and robot chef to create the onset of the robot chefs, and eventually the autonomous vehicles to deliver those food. Delivery casual foods, and essentially eliminating any human labor required throughout the entire supply chain, and it might create that useless class. So yeah, it's definitely very prophetic in the short story. It was written in the 90s, and every single day I look at it, they even paint a picture of the virtual world, the people that decide to stay in the virtual world because they could. Yeah, so it's definitely worth a read. It's only a couple of hours read, I think, 10 chapters.
It reminds me of some Isaac Asimov material as well.
Foundation.
I can't remember the name of the book, but essentially, well, you're familiar with Isaac Asimov, so you know how
Foundation series,
the Foundation series being one of his most famous series. But he did a lot of books and a lot of short stories, and there was one particular book I remember where some planet somewhere in the galaxy, it doesn't matter where, because on Earth the human population was guided by a central computer, by a central AI. People had autonomy. He had Isaac Asimov's 3 or 4 laws. He by these later stages of life, he added an additional law. But this was the same thing. It would determine your employment. It would determine who you are, what you did, your employment. It would maximize efficiency, your efficiency standards. And there was one guy. He was in the story. He was anyway. He was not suited to the needs of this planet. Let's just say he was a psychologist or something, and they already had a psychologist there. Or something, and the computer doesn't make mistakes, and they were wondering, why the hell has the computer tried to maximize efficiency by sending this guy out to here? He doesn't suit our requirements. He doesn't suit our needs. He's consuming resources. Everything's. But why? And it turned out that, kind of like in Star Trek, you have the law of if the planet is already inhabited, you can't occupy it. You can't. We're settlers. We're not occupiers anymore. You have to leave.
It was like a religion of the civilization to not not interject in other civilizations in that sort of period of growth.
Yeah, and there's one interesting Star Trek episode where the planet was inhabited by this strange light entity, an entity of just a light, a pure light, and they didn't know for a while. They didn't know, and then they figured out it was an entity, and they left after a big dramatic story, but because it violated the law. But in this short story, the base master of that planet essentially didn't know or was neglecting the fact that there was life on that planet, and the central computer had worked it out, but he needed a verification process, and the person who was in charge of that verification process was covering it up because he wanted to expand human presence on that planet. And so the computer had sent this person out there to basically undermine its own system and ensure that the human presence on that planet had stopped to comply with their own civilizational laws and guidelines. So it's a really interesting.
Yeah, it's funny with the sci-fi stories, like they get a lot of it right, especially Asimov and the other great ones, right? But then they miss something like, with say 2001, they didn't realize smartphones would be a thing, or iPads would be a thing, or that they miss out on something like blockchain to mitigate false things, fake things, to be able to determine a consensus of truth of certain things. Maybe they had quantum computing that cracked blockchain, and they couldn't come up with a blockchain information system or a quantum communication system. But it's just funny seeing the history, especially futurists today as well. They're missing some pieces, so it's never really, a perfect model. Any model really is just a model. It's not really based on the truths, right? So you're always missing some parameters in your forecasting. And so as futurists, you always got to take them with a grain of salt. Same with the sci-fi. And it's about how we actually shape the future that makes you a real futurist. Because if you can change the way things are today, make the future you want to create, then you are creating the future that way.
And that's why, when I go back to uni in the short future, I will be studying actually history, and I'm going to study history so we can stop repeating some of the cyclical problems of the past, because we got to a point of reflection now in society where we have an abundance of information, and you can see cyclical issues in history where you end up with these issues. And,
have you read Yuval Harari stuff?
No, I have negative. No.
Yeah, he's a historian. He's definitely worth a read. So start probably with *Sapiens*. He looks at the history of humanity, how those cycles that we go through in civilizations. And then he writes *Homo Deus*, so where humanity is going. So that's like the second installment of his books.
Wow.
And then recently he wrote 21 Lessons for the 21st Century. So he brings all it back to the present. And what are the pivotal issues that we're facing today that we can act on to change the course of our history?
I'm really excited to, because a gentleman who wrote this essay, which has now become a long story, called "The World We Create," has agreed to come on the show.
Oh, great!
And I'm just trying to find his name here now. Where is it? Oh, Thomas.
So like you're playing some
Borkman.
snake jazz.
Thomas Borkman.
Thomas Borkman. Yeah, cool.
He wrote a.
Rings a bell.
Yeah, he's got a very, very good profile there, and his work, his literature on from the Big Bang until now, in terms of historically, and then a projection analysis of how to avoid some of these cyclical problems is really, 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 really interesting, and I'm really excited to have him on at some point. I think he's Swedish or Norwegian, Scandinavian up there. Very, very interesting, and I'm really excited. Well, Peter, it's so good to have you on, and I want to ask you if you wanted to talk about anything else, update us, talk about anything else, drop links, whatever you want. I'm not sure how much time you have, but I want to really appreciate your time, taking the time out to hang out with me today, and sorry about the no Archer Report streaming. We'll work on that. Work on a bunch of different stuff. I need to get a green screen.
It's a pleasure to be on. No, it's great. I think some of the things that are coming up. We're putting together a thought leadership piece with Singularity U South Africa. So we're looking at the impacts of automation on society, accelerating nature of it, and what we're trying to do in that thought piece is challenge the narrative that automation is bad and that jobs are good. We need to decouple that, and we need to essentially disseminate that dichotomy. We need to say that automation is a net positive because it enables us to live in an abundance future. But we also want to raise the alarm that without interjections, without government stepping in to create, say, policies that help all the people, we could have that manna future. right? That dystopian manner future where you create a useless class and that people actually suffer a lot more than what the trend has been in the history of humanity. And we want to make sure we go on the right path.
One of the
And that's
things. Sorry, I'm really sorry for killing your flow there, but I really, talking about the useless class and talking about the manner book, and this is where Pavel Elan is really important to the USTP, is if we do have a useless class that, let's say hypothetically, wants to be part of a useless class, they make a choice, a determined choice that they want to be part of a useless class. Something like a UBI is becoming a really big talking point. It's becoming something that's a really big essential factor, especially with the advancement of automation. Can you just quickly speak on a universal basic income and automation? Because I don't think we can't not talk about a UBI quickly if we're going to talk about advancing automation, replacing chefs, replacing media workers.
Yeah, so this is going to be a key part of the thought piece. So, the thought piece essentially sets out the problem that we're facing, what the crisis is going to be, and what are the tools and solutions that we can incorporate to help us, tackle that challenge. And UBI being essentially a government tool, a societal policy to create a floor for everyone. And universal basic income essentially is a no strings attached set amount of money that comes from the government to every citizen in the jurisdiction. In the US, you've seen examples like Andrew Yang's policy when he was running for president. He was saying it's going to be $1,000 a month for every US citizen over the age of 18. And that's essentially quite universal because, above a legal age, you need to ensure that they have the ability to understand and legally own that money anyway. So that's a sort of an example of UBI. It's not a new idea. It's been, proponents of it have included things like Milton Friedman and, the history of, all the experiments done in, say, the European countries, right, in Finland. They've done experiments in Canada, and they've all indicated that it increases the wellness of the people in that society, right? Martin Luther King was proposing for a UBI, a stipend essentially for all the people to ensure that everyone can meet that sort of basic need and be able to jump on that and lean on top of that basic need, the floor that they create. Because right now you can see that the economy we are not well. Right, in the US, there's protests, and
it's even arguably, better for landlords and people with who own the means of production, because would they rather an empty house where people are on the streets and their house is completely empty, sitting on land value, not paying, they're paying tax on this entity, or would they rather people who are in there paying rent? And washing and cleaning it and doing whatever, even if they're not doing anything productive with their day, they're paying some sort of bills and taking that cost burden away.
And the landlords get it. They get it as well, right? It's universal, right? So why would they say no to money? And so, that the whole point is that because it's so universal, it's hard to argue against because no one would say no. Like once you vote it in as a policy, it's hard to remove. Like if you look at, Andrew Yang always talks about the current UBI that's in place in the US, and it's actually in a Republican state, and it's Alaska. It's essentially oil money that's been funded into the citizens of that state. And because it's not, that much, it's a few $100s, but it's still a lot to many people. But once it's in, because it's universal, it's never been voted out. Some years they have to reduce it because of the price of oil. Right, I can imagine it being much this year, but it's essentially been treated almost like a dividend. So rather than income being, typically associated to a job or or labor, it's really a dividend to essentially say that you are the shareholder of your nation. Right? And with everyone having that mindset, it gives them it empowers them a lot more to lead and be part of that sort of ownership structure of, let's say, in Australia.
And you got to have
And that
some
would,
sort of incentive to live in Alaska. I mean, I'm sure Alaska is really beautiful, but it does put you at a bit of disadvantage compared to living in some other part of the United States where there might be more opportunities. Unless you own a timber mill or you're a commercial fisher or mining or gold or whatever they do up there in Alaska. It's not like the land of it's not the not the most opportunistic place in the United States. So it would be nice to live in that area and also, be kind of rewarded for your participation in that state.
I mean, I've never gone to Alaska, but I've heard it's quite nice, and especially, if you got a nice home and if you got everything you need, right? Anywhere in the planet can be essentially terraformed to something that's quite nice, including other planets.
Mars?
So yeah, it really depends on exactly. So it really depends on your means. Yeah, no, I've got no beefs against Alaska.
Well,
I'd be
thanks
keen
for
to
going
check it
down
out.
the UBI rabbit hole. I think we just need to quickly address that if we are going to talk about robots and automation, because people do feel unsettled and they do feel uncertain when they hear that their jobs will be taken away. And I think that since COVID, looking at the amount of jobs being wiped out and looking in what industries that those jobs were wiped out in and the types of jobs that were wiped out, they're essentially all the jobs that, apart from arguably tourism, were going to be wiped out anyway from either quick automation or slow automation integration anyway. So for me and you and for the people who watch That Nation and the industrialists and technologists out there, none of this came as a surprise. But to the people themselves who were caught in that trap, it was a little bit of a surprise because, well, I mean, you're not supposed to have your job wiped out by a pandemic. That's just unusual circumstance anyway. They took the whole world as a surprise. But unless you've been in manufacturing and you've seen your job disappear to robots or overseas labor at a cheaper cost, which is essentially robots not saying that people overseas are robots, but in terms of your country exporting your manufacturing, that's a kind of a robotic outsourcing using human labor. But unless you've seen that in manufacturing, most of these industries have not been exposed to this. You've seen a little bit popping up here and there with the automation at McDonald's. The argument is you want a $15 wage an hour in the United States, we'll replace you with this machine. And you've seen a little bit of that, and people are clued into a little bit, and it's a conspiracy, it's a this, it's a that. But we're talking about a much more fundamental shift, and I think COVID has shown you exactly where the automation is going to sweep through, with the exception of arguably tourism and also higher levels that haven't impacted, that COVID didn't impact because of the withdrawal to the home. So the solicitor sector, the lawyer sector, some of the legal sector hasn't yet been impacted by COVID because a lot of that withdrew from the office to the home. But a lot of that stuff can be automated very quickly, especially case laws and things like that. There's no reason for a lot of humans to be doing a lot of that data mining, which essentially is what they are. But those people have not yet realized that. If you talk to them, and I live around a lot of these people, they have not yet thought about it or realized it, because so far it's menial labor, and they don't consider themselves menial labor because they had to go to uni for 7 years to do what they do. But a lot of those jobs are under threat as well, but they're not. That hasn't rung true to them yet. But that is definitely the case.
Yeah, it's the speed of the impact that's really shocked people. And I don't think I challenge you on that on the tourism stuff. I think just about every industry that's been like immediately impacted saw it coming. It was just the adoption and doing something about it, like in retail, like in tourism, whether it's, Flight Center or, those places where it was unnecessary
Flight
to have
Center,
people.
definitely. I was just thinking about maybe taking people out on tours and doing the actual.
Yeah, even that, with virtual tours, virtual reality, right? That was like on the horizon, and people saw that coming, but because of the adoption, it wasn't it was a long-term problem, or a medium-term problem. They didn't see that it was going to happen in 1 week, right? When no one started booking any of their tickets or asked for refunds. It was that sort of speed, and that's the sort of stuff that really accelerated things because of COVID. You touched on why these companies, like, for lawyers, for example, right, they're not as affected. But I think it's actually having a positive impact in productivity for those lawyers, right? So they're actually never really digitized the way they do things for work.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, these are the guys that still appear in court, putting horsehair on their heads and, talking together, smashing things with wooden hammers. Now they're having virtual court cases and through, really high security type virtual conferences. But basically, they were forced to adapt. And that means their cost is actually coming down. And that means the cost of legal services, hopefully, either that or their profits will go down. That means that we're actually creating more abundance of these, or more affordability of these services for society. It's a net positive. It's really sad the impact it's had on the people that have actually died or suffered through COVID and all those sort of issues with COVID of job loss, right? And you can see the silver lining that's happening, but at the same time, you really have to think about those people that are impacted, that had to forcefully adapt through no fault of their own, right? They saw it coming, but they thought it was a long-term issue. This is exactly the time when governments need to step in to essentially facilitate that. In Australia, there's the job keeper and job seeker, right? But it's essentially still tied to labor, because job seeker, you still have to look for a job, right? What job, right? Who's hiring right now that's not in the technology space or trying to digitize things? Who's hiring right now to keep people on their payroll when those jobs no longer exist? The tasks for those jobs no longer exist because there's no customers to serve. So the whole concept of coupling that job and income together, as opposed to something like a UBI, needs to be addressed. And why is the government still thinking that it needs to be tied to that? And in September, when the job keeper and job seeker ends, or planned to be ended, that's going to cause a huge havoc in society if the adoption, the behavioral methods in demand have not caught up yet, right? So if people are happy to stay at home and not go out to do those retail shopping, to stay at home instead of going to the pub or to their local cafe, those sort of things will actually impact demand behaviors. Yes. And if that continues on, those jobs won't never come back. So there's a permanent impact on the economy. And this is where the government needs to step in to help that transition out for those jobs that have been lost.
They've structurally impacted the psychology of people and the incentive structures. They think that eventually the wheels will turn, but it's not like that. You can't scare people to that record, and you can't. You see, the reason I moved to home is because at the start we had an exemption with the warehouse on the office and stuff like that, and I could function as normally. But then the signals from the Victorian government came so mixed. If you leave your house, there was reports of people leaving their house, going shopping, and they were getting fines for not having a quote-unquote good reason or going here or there. And because of the confusion, I decided it was better to not take the risk, even though that we had an exemption, because I knew at the time they were looking for headlines to scare people. But at the same time, you can't go to the extent of scaring people to that degree and having mixed messages to that degree and no real plan, and then expect people just to return to normal and say, well, we've got it all under control now. You're not going to kill grandma. Go. It's kind of that sort of.
Yeah, the narrative has already been set. Yeah, yes, people have already accepted that story. You can't teach them another story. Yeah,
in that way. No, it's not.
In the opposite way, exactly. And you look at commercial property as well.
Yeah, we've impacted people's psychology, and this is happening in. India used to be the call center operator of the world. I mean, everybody you call up if you're an American consumer, companies would outsource their call center operation to India as a classic example, because it's got a huge English-speaking population and it's cheap labor and they're set up for that sort of stuff. Indians are disappearing in the call center operation. Either from automation, from automated tellers, or because of the work of home revolution, because the costs have come down, because the legislation's changed, because people can sit at home and do call center stuff from their home. In America, that's becoming a new phenomenon, and India is losing its call center operation in a huge, big way. Because
some of them literally could not return to the office, like because of the lockdown measures, right? So there's no infrastructure for them at home to work from home, and that's why there's a disruption to business continuity, which made all the corporates rethink whether they should be relying on another country for these continued services. And yeah, like you said, with automation, there's vendors like Recordshaw essentially does the same thing. It can actually use AI as well to replay the same messages to create these chatbots. And you've seen Google's Duplex, essentially calling up and booking hairdresser calls. And that was like, more than a couple of years ago. And the advancements in that is going to be amazing once it's actually become production and consumer friendly.
And as a technologist, do you see a lot of uptick in, say, consumer spending on domestic household items, Google Home integration and smart home integration and stuff since COVID? Because people, they're retreating to their home. Is that a phenomenon?
Yeah, I mean, you just look at the numbers from JB Hi-Fi and Harvey Norman, and you see that sort of, and the types of things that are being purchased. It's all, similar in line with gardening for those that have a backyard, right? It's increased more than gardening in the uptick. So everyone's spending on whether it's a home office to facilitate that, whether it's home automation, whether it's sort of advancements in technologies to help them be more productive at home. Because previously these might have been provided by the office or people that they were working with on those call centers, like you say. But now companies are just doubling down on business continuity, ensuring that through automation that their business can continue to operate in the face of say a next disruption like a pandemic.
So what does the future of cities look like? Because pre-COVID, the future of cities was still in line with bustling cities and Chicago 2030, what you would see in iRobot. Post-COVID, unless the world returns to that sort of normalcy, until a vaccine at least, we're not going to see that sort of thing. But do you think that the nature of how we will build cities and how we will design big buildings and stuff technologically is going to change, or do you think this is the start of the permanent home revolution where the advancement went from the city center to the city suburbs?
Yeah, and it's been predicted for a while, right? It's just that it's accelerated, like I say, in adoption over the last 10 weeks. There's 10 years of adoption in 10 weeks. And as an example, the KPMG offices in Sydney, we used to have 10 floors. We still do because we're paying for those leases, but only 3 of them are being occupied because of hot desking and people working from home. A recent survey they went out, 80% of the people were happy to work from home continuously. And they might want to come in for a couple of days a week, just to be able to continue that sort of in-person collaboration or meeting clients if they needed to. But basically, most people are happy to work from home. And that means that of the 20% that really need to work from home, right, those people, they'll be able to provide the commercial real estate for those people. They might have kids or have carers to have disruptions at home, or they don't have the infrastructure at home afforded to be able to work productively. Yeah, that's 20% of the office space required. So that'll transform how cities designed. So the skyscrapers, essentially future growth down to about 20% of what it's going to be, what it was planned to be. And that means suburbs will actually bear the burden of being able to incorporate more and more of those local communities rather than the major cities and concentrations that way.
So we're going to see homes being redesigned to integrate a home office as a permanent feature, as a permanent space. Something that it's secluded. You're going to look at apartments that are slightly larger. And it used to be the ensuite that was a big deal. Now it will be the home office. That's the real the big deal in new home architecture, because that's that's the way people are going to go. That's the way companies are going to go. I've seen, and this better than I do. Mark Zuckerberg said most of the Facebook people can stay at home if they want. This is just the
they'd be happy to.
norm.
Yeah. Yeah, because think about from their business perspective, they can hire cheaper labor from all around the world now, not just Silicon Valley. Have you seen the rent in Silicon Valley, and have you seen the salaries of engineers, software engineers, and analysts, data analysts, and scientists in Silicon Valley? It's ridiculous. It's about 10 times above the average. So if you look at it from a medium salary perspective, right? So if they can hire from all of around the world, because they're going to get the same service essentially, mitigating the time zones, but if they have that same way of interviewing them, and the English is proficient enough, they can build rapport through these video chats, then there's nothing stopping them from hiring more globally than keeping to the talent pool in Silicon Valley. So they're happy for everyone to work from home, and they can reduce their costs and salaries as well.
Amazing. Well, Peter, thank you so much for helping me launch the Archer Report, where the tagline is "Go Beyond," and the reason it's "Go Beyond" is because we can go beyond a lot of things. We can go beyond our biology. We can go beyond the confines of the Earth. We can go beyond this physical reality and into virtual reality. We can go beyond the limits of our psychology as animals, and into we can go beyond what our society is. You can play around with that slogan, but the slogan for now is "Go Beyond," because I think that leaves us open to a lot of possibilities of that we're somewhere, and that we can go somewhere else that's potentially a better, happier, more productive, better place, better environment, and more exciting, and yeah, we can do this as a species. We can achieve this. So I really want to thank you so much for coming on Detonation and Archer Report, and I will work on this setup. It will get more professional, don't worry. Mr. Gregory Sagi, I'm going to thank you, because he's going to donate me some green screen, which is absolutely legendary. So that'll be really good. We'll thank Thrivous and our new VPN company, and we'll do better promotions with them, and we'll get links for people and stuff like that. And I'm really excited to be back talking to yourself and others, and hopefully we can do conference calls and everything. We'll catch up with the new USTP leader, that is Charlie Cam, who was there at the foundation of Singularity University, as you know. Well, at least the conversation with Ray Kurzweil and all that. So that's really, really cool. And we're really looking forward to talking to Charlie Cam about his involvement with the USTP and his new role, and how that will play out. Also, I want to thank everybody who watched today. If you've got to the end of this video, we really want to thank you, and make sure you subscribe to the links that are in the description, all the new channel stuff. I will get better, and we'll interact with you on comments, so make sure you turn up to the live events. I'll try and make posters as well. Posters are going to be a thing, so that people know when we're going live in the future. During Detonation, I was just trying to get out as much content as I could and meet as many people, interesting people, as I could, and it got a bit overwhelming in terms of just the next show, always preparing for the next show. But hopefully with the Archer Report, we can slow it down a bit, because I know most of the community now, I know most of everyone now, and we can make it a little bit more where we all turn up, we all have a great time, we all talk about sorts of topics. So posters will help us achieve that. And thanks to everybody who helped get me to this point in terms of getting back on the road. So really, Chairman Gennady in that way is a massive thank you, and Thrivous and Mike DeVerde and VPNs and Project 222 and CubeSpawn and Talk Spectrum and Kate Lovechuck and Malik from the United Nations Global Women's thing. Thank you, everybody. Just everybody. It's been really, really, really great time, and we're gonna get better as a community, and yeah, it'll be really fun. So thank you so much, Peter.
No worries. Thanks for your efforts,
Yeah.
Stu. Yeah, it's thanks for pushing ahead with this Archer Report, and I'm really looking forward to seeing the future episodes.
Yep, and we're gonna have some interesting people on. It's gonna be really interesting. We're gonna have a great time. All right. Well, thank you very much, and we'll all see you on the next show.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks, man.
Thanks, Peter.